Road Trips and Missing Persons by Adriana in the Snow. Chapter 18. Janice had a couple of seconds to regret every decision he'd made in the past few hours before Roman's car hit the water. He'd managed to brace himself enough to not go flying into the front seat, but he was still jerked around by the impact. The airbags in front went off when they hit, which was just his luck, and the car immediately began to fill up with water. Roman and Remus were already struggling to get the airbags out of the way, and Remus reached over to release Roman's seatbelt since he hadn't been restrained himself. Janice jerked over towards the window to try and roll it down. It rolled down about an eighth of the way before the automatic system gave out and the window got stuck. Janice took a split second before he dove for Remus's bag to grab out a hammer he'd noticed in it earlier and swung at the window, shattering it in 2 goes. Roman and Remus had already noticed the broken open window, and so Janice went ahead and pushed himself out of the window and towards the surface. He immediately noticed that there was a figure swimming towards him through the water, and tensed for a fight, assuming it was one of the people who had been chasing him. He struck out with a fist, half blinded by the water in his eyes. There was a startled yelp as he felt cartilage snap under his fist. "Hey! Fuck!" the figure said in response. "Janice!" Janice blinked the water out of his eyes as the familiar, if slightly distorted, voice sunk in. "Lena?" Janice asked, as Remus popped his head out of the water next to him. She glared at him, holding her nose with one hand and treading water with the other. "Shit, sorry." Remus seemed to notice what was happening and swam forward to give her a bit of support. Roman popped up, sputtering a moment later, and smacked Janice across the face. "Karma," Lena spat. "How are you even here?" Janice asked, rubbing his nose. "Everyone went dark, and Logan sent us to go figure out what was going on," she explained. "Then we saw Roman's car in a high-speed chase and followed you." "Speaking of," some other guy's voice called from a few feet away, "can I get a bit of help?" One of the men from the other car had popped up out of the water and was currently wrestling with him. Remus stayed to help Lena out of the water, but Roman and Janice both swam over to help the guy with Lena drag the first guy from the other car and then the second one out of the water. Fred, the other man with Lena, introduced himself while he and Janice trussed up the men from the other car. "Janice," Janice answered. "I figured," Fred replied. Janice gave him a confused look. "You were one of the names the boss was angrily mumbling about this evening." "Yeah, well, Logan can shove it," Janice grumbled. Fred didn't comment. Instead, he just stood up and looked at the 2 men tied up on the ground. "Well," he said, "Lena's car is only a 5-seater. Guess you 2 are going in the trunk. Want to help me out, Janice?" Janice and Fred hauled the 2 men into the trunk together, despite their muffled protests, and Fred slammed the trunk closed. Roman was looking at Lena's likely broken nose, but she shoved him away after a bit of fussing. "Where have you 3 been?" she asked. "We've been busy," Janice said. "Too busy to answer your phones?" "They broke." "All of them?" she answered with narrow eyes. "Well," Remus said, "now that mine is at the bottom of a lake, yeah." Fred looked over at her. "What about our communication devices?" She blinked. "Boss?" she said to thin air. There was no response. "Shit." "You did just drive into a lake," Janice pointed out in a drawl. Lena sighed. "All right, I guess we're driving back to base to report in person." "We were actually heading to Lincoln," Janice said, crossing his arms. Lena crossed her arms right back. "Well, you don't have a car anymore," she pointed out. "It's us 3 against 2. Roman piped in. "Actually," he rounded on him. "Oh, come on, Roman," he snapped. Roman put his hands up in a placating motion. "Look, dude, Dad's already looking for your brother, and we're sort of at the end of our rope. We can go to base and regroup. We'll share what we know, he'll share what he does, we get another car, and we can start fresh." Oh, like Logan would be willing to share anything with Janice. He'd already made it abundantly clear that he didn't trust Janice. What other reason would he have for trying to get him out of the way when Virgil was missing? Janice would probably be locked in a cell as soon as he got to base so Logan could make sure he didn't interfere or give his mother information. He looked over at Remus, hoping for some sort of support, but got an apologetic half-shrug in response. 4 against 1, then. Of course. They might as well just toss him in the trunk, too. "Fine," Janice spit out. "Whatever." "Fred, you might have to drive," Lena said, poking at her nose. She winced. Roman slapped her hand away. "Don't do that," he said. "I wish we had ice." "We have ice," Fred said, opening the backseat door. "Why do we have ice?" Lena said. "I brought a cooler." "What? When?" Why? Before we left, and in case we got thirsty. He grabbed a bumblebee-covered handkerchief out of his front pocket and turned to get ice out of a small cooler in the back of Lena's car. He handed the bundle over to her and turned back to Janice and Remus. You boys are welcome to a drink. He did not seem to register the frown Janice sent his way. He just smiled and took the keys from Lena before shooing them all into the car. Janice somehow ended up in the middle seat between the twins. Roman at least seemed sheepish enough to avoid Janice's gaze, whereas Remus continued to blabber like he always did, with a big smile on his face. He kept brushing up against Janice as though Janice wasn't resenting him an unbelievable amount, as Fred climbed into the driver's seat and started the car. Come on, Jan, don't pout, Remus said. Want something to drink? Janice glared at him, but that did not dissuade him. Let's see. We have apple juice, orange juice, grape juice, a bunch of different naked juice flavors. Good choice, Fred. And one of the little hug fruit barrels, grape soda, glacier freeze Gatorade, cactus coolers, Capri Suns in a bunch of flavors, and green apple ramenes. Or I could be your mixologist and make you a brand new drink out of this wonderful selection. Say no, Roman advised out of the side of his mouth. Janice glanced over at him. How about any of the Capri Suns? He said pleasantly. Good choice, Remus responded, handing one over to him. Janice did not check the flavor. He took off the little straw and removed the plastic before stabbing at the juice pouch. To his mounting frustration, the stupid straw kept slipping instead of going through the hole. Here, said Remus, let me do it for you. He took the pouch and poked the straw into it before offering it back to Janice with a grin. Janice stared at him for a moment and calmly reached out a hand to squeeze the bottom of the juice pouch. It spurted all over Remus's face. Oops, Janice said. He took the pouch as Remus sputtered a bit in surprise and turned away to stare through the front window and idly suck on the straw. Well, that means he's angry at me, Remus said. I never would have guessed, Roman replied dryly. Without a word, Janice removed the straw from the pouch and flipped it over so the juice slowly drained right into Remus's lap. Then he dropped the empty container onto his leg. Well, at least I was already soaked from the lake,